Velkora Prime breathed with wild, damp life. Mist curled through violet ferns, taller than a Terran truck. The trees glistening with slick bark and threads of bioluminescent moss arched like cathedral bones overhead. Distantly, something howled. Not like any wolf, not like any predator known to Earth. It sounded deeper, older, more deliberate. The human camp lay nestled on a mossy plateau above the forest floor. Neat and temporary, a cluster of domed survey tents and atmospheric recyclers, humming low under the twin suns. To most, it would have seemed like paradise. To the Velkorans watching from the tree line, it looked like blasphemy. Captain Elias Darnell stood at the edge of the clearing, hands on his hips, eyes scanning the jungle that shimmered under midday heat. His uniform sleeves were rolled up. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his body was still, coiled like a loaded spring. He wasn't tense. He was aware. Alive. Ortega, he called without turning. Any more signs of tracks near the east perimeter? Yeah, came the reply from behind a stacked set of scanning crates. Ortega's voice was low, casual, but not careless. Claw marks again. Fresh ones. Same weird spacing. No prints. Darnell nodded once. Anything missing? Only a half canister of nutrient gel and one of May's scent tags. Perfect, Lin May muttered as she crouched over a blooming orange fungus. Maybe it's a vegetarian apex predator. Rajiv chuckled under his breath as he wiped dust from his translation slate. Wouldn't that be a lovely surprise? From the forest edge, 6 Velkoran observers stood cloaked in near-invisible mesh, their limbs folded in ritual poses of restraint. They were tall and sleek, their exoskeletons glimmering like chitin carved from dark jade. To them, the jungle wasn't just alive, it was sacred. Every breath of wind carried intent. Every predator was a lesson from the world's will. And deep, within that world beyond the thorns, past the roots that throbbed like veins lived Korith'mal dot, to speak its name was rare. Among the Velkorans, it was whispered during storms and blood moons, murmured only in temples carved of bone. Korith'mal was not just feared, it was respected. A beast so old and terrible, it was said to move between the folds of space, its breath. Bending light, its claws crushing anything it chose not to ignore dot, so when the humans casually set up camp a few kilometers from the edge of its territory, the Velkorans did not stop them. They watched, waited, observed as these soft-skinned, curious invaders set out sound sensors and atmospheric gauges, as they cracked jokes and grilled protein packs over electric heat, utterly unaware of the god-beast that stirred beyond the green. That night, as the jungle exhaled and the suns dipped below the horizon, something moved dot. It didn't walk. It flowed. Trees fell silent in its wake. An unnatural hush fell over the camp as even the wind pulled back. Ortega looked up from his sleeping mat, ears tuned. Lin May's monitor flickered with static. From the scanner, a series of low thuds. Registered. Then something sharper scraping metal. A transport pod rocked off its stabilizers. A shadow, tall as the tents themselves, passed across the fabric wall. Captain Darnell didn't flinch. He stood, picked up his weapon, not a gun, but a collapsible shock spear, and calmly muttered, "Well, I guess we're not alone after all." The night grew teeth, and far away, one Velkoran priest whispered to the jungle, "Let the foreigners see, let them understand." But what none of them could predict, not the humans nor the Velkorans, was that it would not be Korith'mal doing the understanding. It would be those strange creatures from Earth, and they would understand in the most human way possible, through blood and flame and food. The jungle screamed, not in sound, but in motion. Branches snapped in unnatural rhythm. Trees groaned under the weight of something massive, weaving through them. It wasn't running, it was stalking, measuring, learning. Captain. Darnell crouched beside a dimmed lamppost, his shock spear drawn and activated with a quiet hum. The air buzzed faintly, a scent of ionized metal drifting with the forest mist. Around him, his team moved with practiced calm. Lin May clutched, her datapad in one hand and a tranquilizer bolt in the other. Ortega vanished into the tree line, silent as a ghost, and Rajiv began recording every sensory reading he could get from the atmospheric sensors' humidity, barometric pressure, and even light disruption. Then the ground trembled. Only once. A single heavy impact. Then another. Lin whispered, "How big is this thing?" Darnell didn't answer. He didn't know. But something in his gut, a primal, ancient instinct buried beneath evolution and language, told him this wasn't just big. It was wrong. Through the shadows, they glimpsed it. Just a flash in angular shape, obsidian plating that looked too perfect to be natural. 6 legs, each wider than a man's torso. Glowing, slitted eyes like molten gold burning through the darkness. The creature didn't roar. It exhaled, and even that simple breath hurled the leaves into ash. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech cut through the clearing alarms. One of their transport crawlers, the heavy one with the reinforced cargo bay, was gone. Not damaged, gone, ripped clean off its stabilizers and dragged, in seconds, halfway into the jungle. All that remained was twisted metal, shredded polymer plating, and thick black streaks of blood that didn't belong to any human. Raziv's voice cracked. "It's hunting us." "No," Darnell murmured. "Not yet. It's testing." They pulled back into defensive formation. May activated the pulse fence, a thin perimeter of sonic repellents and chemical deterrents designed to ward off most wildlife. Deep down, they all knew this wasn't most wildlife. From his hidden perch in the trees, Ortega silently observed. His hand tightened around a length of synth rope, coated with scent-masking mud. He saw the shape, just a hint lumbering. Through the underbrush, the beast moved with impossible grace, like liquid steel given muscle and bone. It paused, sniffed the air, and looked straight at him. Ortega didn't move, didn't blink. He knew prey didn't stare back. But this thing, it didn't see prey. It saw competition. The humans stayed awake that night. Weapons close, lights off. The jungle swayed around them, unnatural quiet holding the trees in a strangled stillness. They didn't sleep. They listened. And in that listening, they realized something chilling. The predator hadn't just attacked. It hadn't just destroyed equipment. It had circled the camp. It had watched them, moved between them without being seen. It had chosen not to kill. Yet the next morning, the jungle returned to its strange song. Birds called. Foliage glistened with dew. The crawler's wreckage steamed under the light of the twin suns. Darnell sipped his nutrient brew beside the ruins, gazing out over the trees. "It wanted us to know it was there," he said. Ortega nodded from beside a twisted tree. "It left us a warning." Rajiv wiped the sweat from his brow. "So, what do we do now?" Captain Darnell smiled, slow and grim. "We stop being polite." And with that, the humans began preparing, setting motion sensors, digging trenches, crafting traps, cataloging weak points, measuring pressure patterns in the moss. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were studying. The predator had made a mistake. It thought it was watching prey. But now, the prey was watching it back. The sun rose blood orange behind the mountain ridge, casting long shadows across the clearing. Morning mist hung low over the moss, cool and thick, muffling the sounds of the jungle. But inside the camp, something had shifted. Gone was the casual chatter. No more light jokes over protein bags. No humming from Rajiv as he scanned foliage for linguistic clues. The humans moved with focused silence, now calculating, calm. Darnell's voice came only in clipped commands. Ortega sharpened stakes. May rerouted biosensor loops. Even the air around them seemed to hold its breath. Then the signal died. The tripwire rigged to motion sensors near the east quadrant cut out with a soft pop. No alarm, just absence. Ortega stood first. Darnell was already beside him. Second quadrant? The captain asked. Still live, Ortega replied, tightening the strap on his spear harness. Darnell tapped his wrist pad. May? Thermal? A pause. Then her voice came low and tense. Something's there. Huge heat signature. Just outside the brush line. Not moving. Watching. Darnell's jaw clenched. Same as last night. Rajiv muttered from behind a collapsed tent pole. It's not attacking ... again. Because it's patient, May said. Because it's learning, Ortega corrected. Darnell turned toward the forest. And so are we. He stepped out of the camp's perimeter, careful, slow, his movements deliberate. He held no weapon, only a small recording unit in his palm. He walked toward the tree line 5 meters. 10. The jungle seemed to lean in toward him. And then he stopped. Across the clearing, half hidden in the dense undergrowth, stood the beast, Korith'mal, 9 meters tall, plated in jagged black armor that pulsed faintly with bioluminescence. Its legs were insectoid, ending in triple talon feet. Its upper limbs, more like arms than paws, clutched the shredded remnants of the crawler's engine, still dripping fluid. Beneath its crust of bone sat a maw not quite open, not quite closed, and its eyes, 3 glowing slits, were fixed directly. On Darnell, it didn't move. Neither did he. Behind them, Velkoran observers stood atop a ridge, hidden beneath refractive cloaks, breath tight in their chest cavities. Elder Vizith trembled, his staff of living root clenched tight. He had begged the council not to let the humans settle. Near the jungle's edge, he had spoken of the sacred beast, of the laws older than stone. But no one had expected this. One of the younger Velkorans beside him whispered, "They should run." But the humans didn't run. Captain Darnell, eyes locked on the apex predator, turned slowly back to the camp. "Ortega," he called, "set the pit. Activate bait protocol. I want the flank net hot in 5. Ortega's grin cracked like old leather. With pleasure. Hours passed, and then screaming. Not from the humans. From the Skith, the lesser jungle beasts, scavengers, and opportunists. They had wandered into the humans' trap, triggering the heat lures, springing the net lines. Darnell didn't move. He wasn't after them. They weren't hunting scavengers. They were drawing in the king. By nightfall, the camp smelled of blood. Skith carcasses lay in a deliberate arc around the perimeter, their organs removed and arranged in patterns May had carefully copied from the Skith mating displays. Rajiv recorded everything, even as his hands trembled. "This is insane," he whispered. May didn't look up. "It's working." Darnell nodded. "He's coming tonight." That night, the beast returned. It found the remains. It found the scent trail. And it walked straight into the humans' field of traps. The night didn't scream this time. It roared. Steel slammed. Nets sprung. Shock pulses flared with blinding arcs of white-blue lightning. The ground cracked as the predator thrashed, claws slicing through reinforced cable, but not before one. Crucial shot found its mark, right beneath the 3rd jaw plate. A sedative-tipped spear, delivered by Ortega's trembling but sure hand, embedded deep into soft, unarmored tissue. The great beast staggered, then fell. Silence. Not peace, just awe. Darnell approached slowly. The creature still breathed, heavy and shallow. He knelt beside it, brushing his fingers across the rough armor plating. "Beautiful," he whispered, "but not invincible." Behind him, May stood with her scanner, already recording bone structure. Rajiv approached carefully, eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain," he began. "You know what this means, right?" Darnell nodded. "Yeah." Ortega stepped forward, spear slow across his back. "It means we eat well tonight." And as the fire pits glowed and the first cuts of meat began to sizzle, the Velkorans above watched in frozen silence. Their god had fallen, and the humans were roasting it. The smoke rose high above the treetops, curling into the star-choked sky like a silent anthem of blasphemy. Velkoran eyes watched from the ridge in horrified disbelief. Even from a distance, the scent reached them rich. Oily, heavy with roasted protein and scorched bone. The jungle, once sacred, now carried the smell of burning divinity. Below, the humans feasted. Captain Darnell sat cross-legged near the fire, carving slow slices from the still sizzling flank of Korith'mal. The meat hissed as Ortega rotated. A spit made from reinforced alloy tubing, its tip pierced through the predator's muscular forelimb. Lin Mei catalogued bones with surgical precision, setting aside the translucent vertebrae for analysis. Rajiv munched on a charred rib, shaking his head in stunned amusement. "I still can't believe we're eating this thing," he muttered. Darnell wiped grease from his hands and replied without looking up. "Would have been a shame to waste it." A Velkoran scout shuddered at the words, his limbs coiling tight around his ceremonial staff. Elder Vizith stood beside him, motionless, his breath caught somewhere between rage and awe. "They are feasting," he rasped, "upon a living myth." One of the younger priests whispered, "It is a test, Elder. Surely the beast will rise again." But it would not. Its head was mounted against the rock near the main dome tent. Skull cracked, jaw hanging open, its neurotoxic fangs now dull and lifeless. The spine had been removed with clean, practiced cuts, splayed out like a display of power. The heat pits behind the camp glowed with roasting meat, and beside the pit, Ortega stirred a pot of thick, dark broth with a bone ladle made from one of the creature's claws. When Vizith stepped forward from the trees, the humans turned, not in alarm, but with a strange, casual welcome. Darnell raised a hand in greeting. "Evening, Elder? You made it in time for seconds." Vizith did not move closer. "You do not understand what you've done." "Oh, we do," Darnell replied, standing slowly. His shadow stretched long across the flickering firelight. "We've survived. We've established dominance. We're still here." This was not a contest," Vizeth whispered. "Korith'mal was balance. It was the soul of the forest. It kept the others in check. You've undone 1,000 years of sacred order." Darnell didn't blink. "It tried to kill us. And in our culture, if something tries to kill you, it goes on the menu." The camp fell quiet. Even Ortega paused his stirring. Vizeth shook his head. "You are monsters." Rajiv stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "We're explorers, survivors. You sent us into a world filled with threats you didn't warn us about, and we did what humans have always done. We adapted." The fire crackled. Behind Vizith, more Velkorans began to emerge, scouts, priests, soldiers, all drawn by the impossible reality of what they were seeing. Their god was meat. Their myth was soup. The sacred predator was seasoning. Darnell turned, his back to them, and walked calmly to the roasting pit. With deliberate ceremony, he carved off a thick piece of flank, its edges crisp, its center still red and steaming. He walked back to Vizith, held it out. "Try it." Vizith recoiled, as though struck. "You would offer me this desecration?" "No," Darnell said, his voice suddenly soft, almost mournful. I'm offering understanding. The elder turned away. Up in the hills, back in the crystalline chambers of Velkora government, the footage broadcast by drone caused pandemonium. The high priest screamed of sacrilege. The defense ministers debated retaliation. Some demanded exile. Others demanded execution. But not all voices rose in condemnation. A representative from the Torquth coalition, a reptilian species, who had long feared the forests of Velkora, leaned forward during the diplomatic emergency session and growled, "We would like to try your recipe." Back at the camp, Ortega pulled out the last slab of rib meat and set it on a woven biofiber plate. "Captain," he said, "what do we call this dish?" Darnell looked at the fire, the beast, the stunned aliens beyond the perimeter, smiled. "Barbecue." And across Velkora Prime, the word echoed like an ancient curse. Far above the canopy of Velkora Prime, in a gleaming orbital citadel suspended in low-gravity drift, the Velkoran High Council convened in emergency session. The Chamber of Harmonies, usually a place of calm debate, of whispered philosophies, and sacred silence, now boiled with furious energy. Dozens of counselors clicked and hissed in a chaos of overlapping dialects. Translucent wings buzzed involuntarily, limbs twitched. The old codes had been broken, a sacred boundary violated. A god-consumed dot at the center, Elder Vizeth stood before a towering pillar of light, broadcasting a holofeed of the human camp. The image repeating on loop showed Captain Darnell, calmly slicing through roasted flesh, offering it to the elder with the same hand he used to gut the beast. Around the chamber, the projection played from different angles, the smoking ribs, the boiling stew, Ortega laughing as he seasoned the Korith'mal's tail meat with earth-grown spices. Counselor Threx, thin and dry-voiced, stepped forward. "This is not diplomacy. This is domination. They have declared war on our sacred." "No," countered the neutralist envoy from the archive spire. "They have declared war on fear, on the myth of untouchability." An ambassador from the deep hive cast trembled. "They have undone millennia of balance. The predator kept the lesser beasts contained. With it gone, the jungle will spiral." But not all were terrified. In the far seat, shadowed and silent, sat the Union liaison. From the Galactic Concord, an old Torquth general known as Kulras. He hadn't spoken yet, hadn't even moved. But now he leaned forward, and every eye shifted to him as he slowly tapped his clawed fingers on the table. "This is not an act of terror," Kalras growled. "This is nature reclaiming itself. The humans did not desecrate your god. They simply refused to be ruled by it." The chamber froze. Back on Velkora Prime, the human camp remained calm. Captain Darnell moved from workstation to workstation, checking readings, confirming traps had been disarmed, scanning for new threats. The feast had ended, but the consequences had just begun. Rajiv adjusted a signal array and muttered, "Galactic channels are lighting up. Everyone's talking about us. We're trending on Unionet's top 10 number 3 is literally just humans." "What the hell?" Ortega chuckled, flipping a flatstone sizzling with leftover cuts. "Hope they at least spell my name right." Lin May, however, didn't laugh. She crouched near the cleaned bones of Korith'mal, gently brushing soil samples from its joint structure. Her eyes were somber. "We killed a piece of this world," she said softly. "I don't regret surviving, but I wonder if they'll ever forgive us for how we did it." Darnell looked down at her. "We didn't come here to be forgiven. We came to understand, and understanding starts where fear ends." A whine sounded from the Cums Tower, that an incoming hail. Diplomatic priority code, Crimson Union. Not from VELKORANS. It was the Zenithry Committee. Darnell tapped his wrist. The projection opened. A composite face appeared, machine-voiced. Compiled from dozens of galactic species, its tone carefully neutral. This is the Union Zenithreat. Oversight Division. Human Expedition. Velkora Prime. Your actions have triggered a classification reevaluation. Please stand by. There was a pause. Species. Homo sapiens. Behavioral Tier. Reclassified from Adaptive Omnivore Tier C. Darnell raised an eyebrow. To Predatory Apex Class A+. The screen flickered. A new advisory appeared in glowing red text. Advisory. Never assume top predator status in a human's presence. Ortega let out a long, slow whistle. Well, damn. Rajiv blinked. That's not a title. That's a warning. The comms ended. Outside the camp, jungle birds scattered suddenly, as if the forest itself had heard and taken notice. Darnell said nothing. He simply reached down and slid his spiral bone knife into its holster. Above them, in the stars, the galaxy was watching, and it was beginning to understand. Humans didn't just survive. They reshaped the food chain. Night fell once again on Velkora Prime, but this time the darkness felt different. The jungle no longer breathed with confidence. The wind whispered in uncertain tones. The cries of nocturnal predators, once proud and dominant, now sounded hesitant, their patterns disrupted. Something primal had shifted. The apex was dead, its silence louder than any roar. Inside the human camp, the energy had cooled. The fire pits were down to glowing embers. Bones stripped of meat had been cleaned, cataloged, and stacked into neat bundles. The team had gone from survival mode to scientific detachment. But even in this relative calm, no one could truly relax. Lin May, hunched beside a makeshift autopsy slab where the last tissue samples from Korith'mal were being stored. Her voice was low as she dictated to her pad. Sample 117B, muscle tissue shows extreme density variance, likely due to gravity-adapted evolution. Estimated bite force 73,000 newtons. Bone lattice includes bioreactive metals not found in Velkoran mineral registries. She stopped, glanced toward the fire, and whispered, "And we killed it with rope, sound, and a stick." Rajiv was inside the comms tent, rerouting long-range uplinks to Earth's diplomatic corps. Messages from across the galaxy flooded in some curious, others shocked, a few openly terrified. A blinking alert marked one message as high priority. It was short. From Mars Defense Think Tank Subject. Tactical Review Request. Velkora Event. Note. They want to know how we did it. Meanwhile, Ortega was alone on perimeter watch, crouched behind a log with motion sensors spread in a fan. Around him, he cleaned his bone spear carefully, turning it in his hands. The weapon had been his backup. Now it was a symbol. He looked out over the dark jungle and muttered to himself, "You thought we were prey. We didn't just flip the food chain, we used it for seasoning." But not far beyond the lights, something was moving, not Korith'mal, not another predator. Scouts. Velko ran. Dozens of them. Cloaked in reflective camouflage, the observers crept forward, some old, wearing ceremonial armor, others young, trembling with both fear and fascination. Their purpose wasn't attack. It was understanding. From the ridge above, Elder Vizeth returned. This time, he came unarmed. The humans didn't flinch. Ortega made no move. Darnell, seated on a crate, simply raised his eyes as the elder stepped into the circle of light. "I've come," Vizeth said, "not to judge, but to witness." Darnell gave a slight nod. "Then you're welcome." The elder paused before the bone pile. His claws hovered over a cleaned piece of rib, etched now with May's notes and symbols. "You do not understand the weight of this creature," Vizeth said. "It was more than dominant. It was part of our cycle. It devoured the diseased, regulated the wild, tested us. It made us who we are." Darnell stood. You worshipped it. Yes, and it tried to kill us. It always did. Then we passed your test, Darnell said. We just didn't know we were taking one. Viseth looked into the captain's eyes, and for the first time, something flickered their respect. You are not what we expected. Darnell smiled faintly. No one ever is when they're starving. Behind them, Lin Mei rose from her samples and approached slowly. She held a wrapped bundle Korith'mal's tooth, engraved with both human letters and Velkora glyphs. She extended it. A gift, she said softly. A reminder that we didn't kill out of hate. We killed because we had no choice, and we studied it, honored it, learned from it. Viseth took the tooth dot. He bowed low and slow, deeper than any in the shadows behind him expected dot, and then he said what no Velkora had ever said to an outsider before. You may walk our forests. A quiet murmur spread among the scouts. Jungle listened dot, and for the first time since Korith'mal's fall, it did not sound angry dot, it sounded curious dot. From orbit, the Galactic Union dispatched xenobiologists and first contact analysts. From the edges of the galaxy, warlords, scholars, and chefs submitted formal trade inquiries, and in Earth's military academies, simulations labeled Operation Velkora were added to survival training with a single line of doctrine. Do not fear the predator. Become the unknown. Captain Darnell stood alone as the firelight flickered. He looked out into the black wild once more. And he knew the jungle would remember them, but it would never see them the same again. ChatGPT said the jungle had changed. Days passed since the fall of Korith'mal, and yet Velkora Prime remained eerily silent. The usual cycles of sound, the deep rumbling of territorial beasts, the shrill warnings of prey, the distant crashing of wings through dense canopy had quieted. In their place was something else. Caution, uncertainty, respect. Back at the human camp, activity hadn't slowed. If anything, it had accelerated. What began as a peaceful scientific expedition had transformed into something larger, diplomatic, strategic, historic. A line had been crossed, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. Rajiv sat cross-legged near the central uplink tower, surrounded by blinking consoles and long-range communication dishes. His fingers danced across the interface as he translated a flood of incoming messages from all corners of the Galactic Union. A ping lit the top of his display. Message priority. Ultra. He opened it. Origin. Galactic Concord Defense Committee. Subject. Threat Matrix Update. Human Combat Efficiency on Death World Class Planet Summary. Reclassification complete. Authorization granted to study human adaptive behaviors in high-threat ecosystems. Contact pending for joint tactical simulations. Rajiv leaned back and exhaled. We're not just weird anymore, he muttered. We're terrifying. Inside the operations tent, Lin Mei briefed a holographic panel of Velkora scientists who had cautiously approached the camp under Viseth's blessing. They hovered with a mixture of fear and reverence, watching as she projected scans of Korith'mal's internal systems, neural clusters, and combat response mechanisms. This wasn't just a hunter, she explained. It had pattern recognition nearly on par with Terran predators. Learned from failed strikes. Waited. Watched. But we watched too. One of the Velkora's young, wide-eyed, his antennae trembling, asked, And you truly brought it down with no plasma, no orbitals, no machines? Ling glanced toward Ortega, who was sharpening another spiral bone blade. No weapons. Just planning, bait, camouflage, and one well-placed spear. The Velkorans murmured among themselves. What they felt wasn't just disbelief. It was a kind of existential dread, an understanding that humanity had not challenged Velkora with fire and brute strength. They had studied. They had adapted. They had won. Captain Darnell stood alone at the camp's edge, surveying the tree line. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply watched as new creatures, a pair of long-necked grazebeasts, usually prey to Korith'mal, wandered closer to the camp than ever before. The jungle itself was reorganizing. Without its apex, the balance was shifting, and the humans had become part of that balance. Footsteps approached. It was Elder Vizith. "No celebration today?" he asked. Darnell shook his head. "We came here to map soil, not rewrite your entire ecosystem." Vizith looked at the beasts grazing nearby, then at the bone knife at Darnell's belt. "And yet you did." Darnell turned to face him. "You see us as a threat." "Some do," Vizith replied. "But others now see you as correction. Something ancient, something the stars forgot how to fear." The silence between them was long and heavy. Vizith finally said, "There's a word in our oldest dialect, Vor-Zek Ra. It means the one who balances chaos by becoming it. We've only ever used it for Korith'mal." Darnell raised an eyebrow. Vizith continued, "We now speak that word for you." Before the captain could respond, Ortega called out from the west end of the camp. Movement in the underbrush, large. 4 legs, maybe 6. Darnell didn't hesitate. "Stand down," he ordered. "No weapons," the team obeyed. From the trees, something stepped out, massive, reptilian, with armored hide and narrow violet eyes. It studied them silently, took in the camp, the smells, the bones, then slowly it bowed its head. Not in submission, in recognition. Rajiv whispered, That's a razorback spin-a-death. Those things never come near open fire." The creature stared at Darnell, then turned, and vanished back into the trees. The jungle accepted them now, not as invaders, but as something worse, equals. Back at the diplomatic relay, Earth's ambassador to the Union addressed the chamber with a calm, unreadable smile. "When our species is threatened," he said, "we don't conquer, we don't run. We do what humans have always done." He leaned forward. "We set the table." The sky over Velkora Prime turned to molten gold as the twin suns dipped beneath the canopy. Shadows stretched long and deep, fingers of night creeping back into the wounds carved by the fallen apex. But this time, the dark wasn't feared, because something worse than Korith'mal had entered the food chain, and it smiled dot in the center of the camp. The fire had been rebuilt, not for warmth, not for food, but for memory. A quiet circle of stone surrounded the pit, and above it, on a makeshift pedestal, rested a single fang from the predator's lower jaw, polished, etched with 2 sets of symbols, Velkoran and Terran. Life, death, balance, the names of every member of the team had been inscribed around its base, along with one phrase, understood through fire. Captain Darnell sat beside it, silent, not proud, not arrogant, simply still. Elder Vizith approached slowly, walking not as a leader, but as a witness. His ceremonial armor was gone. In its place, traveler's robes, the kind worn only by those willing to learn again. "You changed our world," he said. Darnell didn't look up. "It was never our intention. That's why it matters." Behind them, the jungle pulsed with strange new life. Without Korith'mal to police its domain, rival species had begun staking fresh territory. Old patterns cracked. New ones formed. Some Velkoran scientists watched in terror, others in wonder, and more than a few quietly admitted off record that perhaps this shift had been long overdue. Atop the ridge, a Velkoran war scribe composed a new entry into the Codex of Balance. His voice rang out in high ritual cadence as he carved the words into a living tree. And so the predator was humbled by those who did not roar, by those who did not fly, by the ones who walked and cooked Back on Earth, the event had gone viral. Clips of the barbecue, the trap, the silent standoff between Darnell and Korith'mal had been transmitted across every known network. Mean culture exploded. If it tries to eat us, it goes on the menu, became a slogan on mugs, jackets, even defense recruitment posters. But behind the jokes and bravado, deeper circles whispered something else. The humans didn't just kill. An apex predator. They studied it, understood it. And turned it into a weapon. Because Korith'mal wasn't the end. It was only a beginning. Across the galaxy, apex species began to shift their behavior. On Tralaxis, a sandmaw turned from a Terran botanist and retreated something never seen before. On Junarth V, a swarm of feral stinger beasts bypassed a human mining team, choosing instead to hunt easier prey. The apexes remembered, and the Union watched. Back on Velkora, Lin May stood beside Ortega, overlooking a fresh clearing. No weapons, no tents, just Earth. We leave tomorrow, she said softly. Think they'll miss us? Ortega asked. May didn't answer right away. She glanced toward a young Velkoran child walking barefoot along the tree line, trailing a human-made sensor bead like a toy. I think, she said, they'll never forget us. From behind them, Rajiv shouted, Darnell, you better see this. They ran to the edge of the ridge. Beyond the trees, glowing in the dusk, stood dozens of alien creatures, predators and prey alike. Razorbacks, thorn bears, glide panthers, all silent, all watching, all standing still. Darnell stepped forward. The largest of the creatures, scaled, armored, with bright yellow eyes, lowered its head, not in fear, not in understanding. Moment passed. Then the creatures turned and vanished into the jungle. No panic. No rage. Just quiet, solemn recognition. The humans had earned their place, and the jungle had rewritten the rules. The final transmission from Velkora Prime, sent by Captain Elias Darnell to the Galactic Concord, species, human, status, confirmed. Not apex by size, not apex by teeth, apex by intent, apex by will. We do not hunt for power, we do not rule by fear. But if something threatens us, we learn, we adapt, and we eat it. The message was archived under High Threat Review, Advisory. Level Alpha. And across the stars, one truth echoed like fire through silence. When humans arrive, it's not the predator you fear. It's who comes next, and what's left standing after the fire. Because humans don't just survive, they change. What survival means, forever.